It's preparing now, so you're going to be live any second.
How many people are on there?
10 are in the waiting room, 23 are viewing,
Yeah,
24.
For a random out of the blue, right?
You're live.
All right, we're live. Welcome to the Election Whisperer live chat town hall spectacular. Hammy wanted to say hi to you guys. He's like, I like live town halls. So he got his little fill in. Dogs are suffering today because it's a rainy day. So I'm excited. I thought this would be a cool feature, and I'm so stoked on my team to be able to pull it together the way they did, especially kind of spontaneously, since I kind of made up doing it and getting it all thrown together in a matter of a couple of days and with no preparation. So go team. I'm excited to kind of hear and engage with you guys too. So the way this is going to work is you'll be able to actually come into the Zoom and hang out with me instead of having to do the written question, like impersonal thing. And that's great. I'm really excited to hang out and get to know and talk with you guys. So I don't really have an agenda. You know, we're down to the teens now, guys. I mean, election is just nipping at our heels. And, you know, this is to the point too, where people start to look at things and they want answers, right? And generally speaking, we're able to give, you know, pretty good guesstimates off of certain indicators. And today, I think a big one was going around, which was off of Dave Wasserman's analysis of registration data, coming from especially the Midwestern states. And if you're following my Twitter thread today, you'll know that I pushed back a little bit at that analysis because Democrats halted their registration efforts when the pandemic swept in. And I really can't stress enough, we've had two very divergent campaign environments going on in this country since March. In March, you know, once the pandemic shutdown happened, Democrats pulled in a full shutdown of their campaign operations. And then as the country began to open back up, the Biden campaign, the DCCC and the DSCC told their candidates, and the Biden campaign obviously told their state operations that they could not do in-person field operations. They couldn't do in-person voter registration operations. And that was, frankly, in terms of the in-person door-to-door stuff, that was the way that the game was played up until a couple of weeks ago. And organizations that do voter registration adhered to and abided by the CDC and public health guidelines. And that meant you didn't go and do these big, large scale person-to-person voter reg drives. And that really changed the game for Democrats. So what that means is it canceled the ability for us to use that data. Like, you know, my plan was to look at voter registration data. I did it in Virginia in 2017 and 2019. I was able to look and say, oh, wow, look at these voter reg data coming in. It was very clear the Democrats were, you know, that enthusiasm that I'm looking for was very evident in voter registration patterns. And the same is true in the 2018 midterms. But as soon as I realized that Democrats were going to suspend voter reg and Republicans weren't, I can't use it, right? Because I don't know if I'm looking at enthusiasm differences or just the difference of, you know, one organization continuing on, albeit, you know, differently. I mean, certainly I would expect that the Republican registration numbers changed, but, you know, there's no comparison, right? And this is also true for another really important metric that I had planned to use to track, and that was vote by mail. Vote by mail is as I've talked about a lot, a technique that was invented by Republicans. It's called absentee balloting. I talk a lot about the differences in electioneering between Republicans and Democrats and how much better the GOP is at it. One of the reasons that they're better at it is that they get really high levels of turnout of partisan Republicans. And because our elections are so polarized and hyper-partisan, if you turn out 70% of registered Republicans in a contest and the Democrats are only getting 55, 60%, even, the persuasion game becomes less important, right? You're winning such a robust number of partisans that it really helps you. And that California 25th special election that we just saw a few months ago play out, where that Katie Hill seat flipped back to the Republicans, is a great example of that, because there's certainly no atmospheric explanation for why the 25th would flip back to the Republicans. Yeah, Mike Garcia is Latino. Yeah, he's a good candidate, but it's not like all of a sudden the environment was great. And if we didn't know like who's voting, we do in California. We have party voting. We have, not everywhere votes by party registration. And so we were able to see that Republicans turned in 14 points more ballots than Democrats. And so we were able to understand the results of that election were a story of partisan participation, the way that Biddecofer always understands elections. And so, the GOP was using absentee balloting as a methodology, and frankly, in many places like Florida, a methodology that allowed them to overcome registration and numbers disadvantages. And over time, Democrats started to recognize, we should be doing this too. We should be, getting our voters to do these mail absentee ballots. We should be tracking them, because with you do same day voting, you get one shot, it's one and done. If they don't vote, they don't vote. But with absentee balloting, you can get multiple points to push somebody to the poll. And so once the Democrats started to adapt and adopt that system, and in places where they controlled state government, they institutionalized it, right? Colorado, vote by mail, like Oregon. California, right? They literally made, and in Virginia, the first thing they did when they had power, absentee, no excuse absentee balloting. But in places where they don't, they started to at least try to push people towards more absentee use. And so Republicans started to realize, okay, we're not going to have this advantage anymore. And Donald Trump, by the way, hates mail voting, because he thinks in his brain that that's the reason he lost so many seats in 2018 in the big blue wave. I mean, keep in mind that those California seats on election night, I knew were flipping. I knew they were flipping 4 months before election day, but like everybody else was like, are you sure those seats are going to flip? Because on election night, the Republicans were leading the count. They were up a couple points, or at least up 1 point on the election returns. And I was arguing with people, including an MSNBC, direct producer, about how no, these seats are all flipping, and no one would believe me. And the reason is most of the ballots hadn't come in yet. They were going to be coming in vote by mail. And so Trump blamed vote by mail and what he calls ballot harvesting for his big midterm bruising. And so he started to publicly come after vote by mail. And as he did that, that's when, and trust me, the Florida Republican Party's like, dude, shut up. That's how we win here in Florida. That's how we elected you in 2016. But when you have a powerful elite signal like that coming down to voters, it's huge. And Trump coming out so hard against vote by mail has really affected Republican voting behavior. It has moved, it's so hard to move aggregate voting behavior. But when a president, especially because the Republicans are kind of culty with Trump, he has made it so that Republicans are really turning away from vote by mail. And that means when I'm looking at vote by mail behavior right now, I can't look at it and say, okay, Democrats are really, we can see this right now in the data. Democrats are really outperforming Republicans in vote by mail. Okay. So I could look at that and say, oh, wow, look at this. Democrats are killing Republicans in vote by mail right now. But the context of knowing that Republicans are much less inclined this year to use vote by mail and maybe holding back to vote on election day means that that may be a noisy indicator. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm not going to go out on Twitter and tell people, hey, Democrats are killing it on vote by mail, because I might not be telling you guys what we're seeing is may not be what we think we're seeing, right? So we've had that problem with a couple of indicators this cycle. The pandemic has changed things. Trump has changed things. There's only a few things that we can really track that are apples to apples for 2016. We also have the same problem with survey data because education weights were not in play in 2016, and now they are in 2020. So it's kind of tough, and we don't have a lot of things that we can apple to apple to tell you what's going on. Now we can tell you those voting lines, like that early voting signal, is a pretty strong indicator of a lot of enthusiasm, and we're seeing it on both sides. But we're definitely seeing the enthusiasm that we would have expected to see if that negative partisanship, Dem coalition surge was coming. And of course, the polling data is also very supportive of that. So after that little intro rant, the rest is going to all be driven by you guys. And it looks like my producers lined up my first guest that I'm so excited to meet. It looks like Vivian Leal, who's on mute right now. So I don't know if Flip's going to unmute you, or you will, Vivian, but mute yourself and introduce yourself.
We'll have Vivian ready here for you in just a sec.
Okay.
Vivian, go ahead and unmute yourself when you're able to.
Hi, I'm Vivian Leal. I advocate on healthcare policy at the national level, and I work with Indivisible Northern Nevada in the swing county of Washoe and across the north, where we have a lot of the voters that Rachel is describing who can't really be captured in traditional ways. A third, but 28% of our electorate here is specifically registered as nonpartisan.
Okay.
So they really don't show up in any of those numbers. You have to really be out there, whether it's in person or virtually, communicating with them. And so that's what we've tried to do. So we really feel like we have a sense on the nonpartisan vote here, and they will swing the state for sure. But like Rachel says, it takes us months of yelling with our hands up in the air to have anybody notice, like, it's Washoe. And then suddenly, as all the presidential campaigns awake to this, they descend upon us, and all the systems aren't necessarily in place from the groups on the ground to receive that effort in the most successful way possible, because they haven't really been looking at the real numbers, not just these perceptions that they can get from on high.
Well, Vivian, then I'm very sympathetic to your plight, right? If you follow me, then I'm sympathetic to that plight. And it's like the thing that I, now that I'm a free agent and I have no job to protect, post-election, if we survive, and that's a big if, because of the fact that, Washoe County, shouldn't have to be throwing its hands up in the air. Like, the data is what the data is, and it's been very clear, and it should have led investment in infrastructure to Washoe in advance, and not, oh, look, magically, here it is, So I'm sympathetic, and I'm hoping, if we survive this bullet, that, going forward, we're going to be proactive and not reactive in terms of where investment happens for at least the time period that, there's two political parties in America right now. One of them is a political party that advances programs and policies and issue positions, and the other one is going like towards fascism. So, we definitely want to help the one that's not doing that. So very good, very good. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to ask about or tell us about in Nevada? Oh, she can't unmute herself, Flip.
Are you still muted, Vivian? I apologize. Hang on.
No.
Go ahead. You should be able to unmute now.
Okay, I think I got it. Yeah, so for us, especially because we are a deeply purple county, people do mix tickets here, and this is how we were able to replace a non-functioning Senator, Dean Heller, in 2018, and we're hoping to replace a non-functioning president in terms of policy on the issues. I think that having ready, queued up platforms to make a change in people's lives on the issues that we've been advocating for, that is where we come at any person who's elected to office, because we are nonpartisan, which does not mean apolitical. So right now, we are clearly behind a lot of candidates who happen to be Democrats, because they are moving forward on these issues, and sadly, the Republican Party is not. So that is where our weight is going, behind those who are pro healthcare, pro fair democracy, and all the things that we value. Seeing humanitarian values reflected in public policy is the goal of our group. So the Democratic Party will have to deliver in the first 24 months if they want to see a return of the massive coalition lining up behind them.
Right. Yeah. And this is a really good point because, I don't know, 24 months ago, I gave a speech for the League of Conservation Voters or League of Women Voters, one of the two. And, they're nonpartisan as well. And they have this big platform of things that they work on. And, like you look through it and it sounds like the Democratic Party platform, but it isn't. It wasn't, right? It wasn't 25 years ago or 40 years ago. And, we really have a Republican Party that has fallen off the tracks. And I was talking to a German reporter today, and the issues that he was talking about, I asked him, are German citizens concerned about the United States right now? He, aside from the anti-democracy elements, the things that he talked about is, the United States used to be the global leader, and we have climate change is like the speeding bullet. And, the United States is like not only not leading, like the one thing that we managed to get them to do, they jumped off the train, right? And it's terrifying the global community. So thanks, Vivian, for sharing that stuff. Susan, nice to meet you. Woohoo! All right, unmute Susan Church. Let's hear it.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So tell me about your question, comment, concern.
I'm just having like freakouts over the election, so I want to hear you call me.
That's what I figured. I figured people were.
That's all I care about. I actually, in the middle of the night last night, started like punching the air and stuff in the middle of my dream because it was like related to election anxiety. So.
Yeah. No, I figured that. I mean, we all have election anxiety. I can't even like fathom the final week, I think about like, what am I going to do that week to sleep? Like, I don't drink. I'm unfortunately like allergic to alcohol. I can get away with like a social beer here and there after softball, but like, I can't drink myself into a coma,
I'm going to be in Michigan with like 5 of my friends because I'm an immigration lawyer and we're doing voter protection. So we're going to drink ourselves silly. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. And I think that's the best thing to do is to be extremely active, right? And proactive and working on the problem of survival, right?
Yep, exactly.
So what specifically can I do to help you the most with your election anxiety?
I want to hear about Pennsylvania.
Okay.
That's our key.
All right. Yeah, no, Pennsylvania is an interesting nut, right? I mean, here's the thing with Pennsylvania. It's a realigning state because all of these 3 Midwestern states they're doing like realignments, right? The union, working class, rural areas of Pennsylvania, of Michigan, of Wisconsin, where, white working class men predominantly were voting for Democrats for many, many years, have been de-aligning from the Democratic Party and realigning to the Republican Party. And that has been predominantly, as I talk about in my big book that eventually will get published, is that, collapse of white male power paradigm and the rise of egalitarianism. And, it would be difficult to deal with if you didn't have this fear industry that makes money aggravating it, right? I mean, like the Sean Hannitys of the world, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, they get rich and buy their yachts by aggravating these men and capitalizing on their anxieties, because the more anxious and unrested, a working class man in rural Pennsylvania is, then the more yachts that Tucker Carlson can buy, right? Because he's clicking and he's reading and he's buying and he's, but the downfall of that is democracy, is civics and society, right? So when 2016 happened and you saw this realignment, like kind of shake out where rural Pennsylvania overperformed for Trump and Clinton kind of, languished more than she should have because, Black turnout decreased by about 5 points nationwide in that 2016 cycle. And you had a lot of defection voting that was, could have gone maybe to Clinton. It could have gone to Trump too, but it could have gone to Clinton. And we're talking about 4, 5, 7 points between third party and write-in balloting in Wisconsin. It freaked people out, right? And it's going to be something that we're going to continue to see because the GOP killed first. They killed unions, and that was the anchor, that kept these white men anchored to Democrats. And, without that economic anchor, now they're really free floating. And it's ironic as hell that they're going into the very party that murdered them economically. But, it's a complex issue. So, and there's nobody coming in to tell them the opposite story, right? There's like when Democrats go in there, it's from a position of weakness and apology and softness. It's not to go in there and be like, no, let me tell you what they did to you and why they did it like that, right? So they're not getting any conflicting, damage control effort, right? So what we're going to see though in 2020 is we are going to see turnout coming from those suburban, urban areas that's just going to be ginormous, right? I mean, think about 2018. And the surges that we saw out of Pittsburgh, out of Philadelphia, out of the suburban areas. And that's, the story of 2016 was, wow, look at the strength of the rural, disaffected, white, working class voter. The story of 2020 is going to be, look at the strength of the suburban, college educated voter. And, I can't stress enough how different the electorate demographically is going to look, although we are going to see very strong, very aggressive fight out of that rural working class component because they get fed nothing but raw meat, red meat diet all day. It's not like they ever become complacent. And I mean, they're told, even when they have all of the reason in the world to relax, that the fate of the world hangs on their vote, right? And so they don't relax. And they are going to be showing up in big numbers. There's just, there's a lot on this side. I mean, you can win an election. You think about all of the things stacked up against Trump, right? And that's why their plan is no longer to win the vote, right? It's to win the counting process of the votes.
Rachel, do you mind if we go to Matt Foley? He's been waiting patiently.
All righty. What's up, Matt?
Hello. Just want to say I'm glad to have and hear your voice in the sphere of election predictions. But I had an interesting question I really want to pose to you. One being, has there actually been any significant polling regarding how people are reacting to the elimination of the extended unemployment benefits and how people are potentially leaning left, hopefully not right? And to follow, I've been noticing a lot of the Democratic debates that a lot of the candidates don't have a response to the Republicans who are saying that people are going to take advantage of the unemployment extended benefits and not pushing back on, one, the potential integrity of the voters who they're saying they're going to do this, and two, it seems like an easy layup to say, hey, people are not successfully living on the wage they're currently making right now, and they should be making a livable wage.
Rachel is muted. Hold on.
Yeah.
I muted myself because Kinsey and Hammy were barking. Yeah, no. So Matt, you're noticing what, a really common phenomenon that I note a lot, which is that Democrats really suck at messaging, right? I mean, because like if it was me and I was in charge, I'd be like, look, they're denying these unemployment benefits to millions of people. This is like an economic crisis situation, right? And so I would be hitting ads really, really hard on that unemployment issue. and I would be like framing the GOP as like the band of misers, right? I mean, here are these rich assholes, right? They're all rich as hell, and they're like literally starving you out of your house so that you go die in a pandemic, right? I mean, that's the plan. That's the reason they don't want to give you the unemployment plan, is that way you have to leave your house to go die in the pandemic. I mean, that's literally why they're doing it. And, but I don't get to run the messaging. I don't get to do the ads. I got to endure, the things that they come up with. And occasionally they'll come up with something that at least is like somewhat decent. And I'll go, hey, that's an attaboy, right? But it's certainly not the way that I would come after it, right? But you're exactly right. I mean, especially because, and I think it's probably due to the fact that none of these people have ever gone hungry, right? And I'm guessing Matt, maybe me and you have. I've gone hungry a few times in my life, believe it or not. And when you have not had money, when you have had situations where you've had $300 like in a check, and you're thinking about 2 or 3 weeks out and a couple bills to pay, and trying to figure out how you're going to come up with food out of that too, right? And the shit doesn't add up. Like, economics is salient as hell, right? And the Democrats just leave it sitting there all the time. Like it sucks because they're the party of the heart of the matter, right? They're the party out there fighting for people to not starve to death, to have a living wage, to, get paid, and to not be, not to have to go back to work 5 hours after birthing a baby. But they never go out there and make that message, right? And then it leads to shit like this. Like we'll hear Democratic surrogates on TV. I hear this, and I always want to just like chuck a shoe at the TV. Well, I'm Democratic surrogate, right? Well, it's, the Democrats have really abandoned the working class. They really haven't, it's our fault. We haven't really put out a message or a platform for the working class. And I'm like, oh, really? If I was on the show, I'd be, oh, really? Yeah. Well, tell me then, what is the Republican platform for the working class? Okay. Or the Latino population, because show me what their platform is. Okay. Because here's a free tip. Doesn't exist, dude. Okay. Doesn't exist. There is no fucking Republican platform for the working or the middle class. It's the Democrats that want to raise wages. It's the Democrats that want to give you, holiday time off if you're sick. It's the Democrats that brought you Obamacare, so on and so fucking forth. And you could just go on and on and on with it. And yet you never hear, even on these debate stages for these Democratic primaries, anyone get out there and point out that the reason the American middle class has completely collapsed is for 30 years of extremist GOP, basically privateering. They've raped and pillaged the middle class. Why aren't we talking about that? So, anyway, that's my little tirade on that. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's, there's 2 things that we should be hitting on these closing 2 weeks. COVID, right? We should be hitting COVID, and we should be hitting the economic end. And we should be making it abundantly clear Trump's plan is herd immunity and let them starve. That's the plan.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. And that's a fancy picture.
Shall we hear from BK next? BK, if you're still around, can you unmute for us?
Oh, yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you, buddy.
All right. So I've been reading about there's this far right radio show called Cotto Gottfried, and they're claiming that Trump is winning Florida because the early returns, according to Target Smart, have a Democrat net advantage of less than a certain amount, which I think they claimed was 600 to 700,000 votes. Is it too early to make any claims like that? Or I don't know what their logic is.
Well, that's a really great question. And you know what's really going to be cool about that? Any fucking minute now, Tom Bonier, chief executive of Target Smart is going to be joining this Zoom. And he's going to be able to tell us exactly what's up with the data, especially in relation to Florida or elsewhere.
Yeah, I think people have been discussing Michigan and Wisconsin as being oddly different from what the polls.
Okay, well, he's supposed to hop onto this Zoom at 3:30. Okay, it's 3:30 right now. So he'll be on here in a second. Let me take another question and then he'll be on and we can talk about that, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay, while we're waiting for Tom, how about Jessica Drast? Jessica, I'm going to send you the. Actually, I don't see it in our lineup anymore. No, there you are. You're just listed as Drast, comma Jessica. So, Jessica, if you can unmute.
Hi, yes. Thank you so much for doing this and all of your wisdom that you put out there. And I'm coming to you right from over the bridge in Jersey outside of Philly. And I've been on the ground doing canvassing, like lit drops with the PA Dems. And what we're seeing is that, you know, there is this sentiment that the communities of color in Center City, Philly, are being completely ignored and kind of taken for granted. And again, I'm not saying, like, I'm not here to badmouth anybody. It's just a matter of getting this message of even just listening to them, especially about criminal justice reform. And I mean, I know all of this stuff is in Joe's plans. Like the stuff is there, like there's good stuff there, but there's not the attention being paid to it. And even just showing up in those communities, like even I will say that amazing ad that or video that just came out using the Bruce Springsteen song for Pennsylvania, wonderful, but it's talking about the streets of Philadelphia and nowhere in there is it even showing communities of color in the streets of Philadelphia. So it's so much focus on the white suburban and rural voters, whereas you've got Trump and you've got, you know, all of the campaigns coming in right into speaking to them and saying, guess what have Dems done for you? So I guess I'm just kind of curious, how can we help shift the messaging?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that because there's two different things, right? Number one, there is this problem within Democratic campaigns of not investing enough money on GOTV and voter turnout in like the low propensity communities of color, voters who would turn out and vote for Democrats if they were focused on and resources were spent on them. And that is a huge problem and that should definitely happen. However, like when you say what you've said to me there, like I have beginning to suspect that like there's an actual GOP operation where they're trying to convince they're actually like running around and they're getting Democrats to like, okay, you know how, remember I was just talking about how Democrats like will walk around, even like these top level like Democratic surrogates on TV will say, well, Democrats abandon the working class. They don't, you know, they abandon the working class. And you're like, wait a minute, what the fuck are you talking about? Like the Democrats abandoned, what about the fucking Republicans? They murdered the working class, right? Remember how I talked about that? That shit was not organic, okay? That was like a part of a GOP, like brain trust, like think tank, strategic effort where they came in and they're like, let's convince Democrats to do this like thing to themselves that screws them with the working class. I think that that's what's happening here with the Black community. I think that they're trying to get you guys and the Black community to walk around and tell each other that the Democrats that the Democrats are not representing the Black community at the exact time, by the way, that Black voters, Blacks and Latinos are rising to their zenith of power, by the way, in the Democratic Party. Okay, they've never been more empowered than they are right now. This is like their moment, right? They are running more state and local parties than they ever have. They're running for more seats in office than they ever have. Kamala Harris is the vice presidential nominee. And I think what they're trying to do is get you guys to start talking about this talking point and get this to become a conventional wisdom that reinforces itself. And you know what? They are the types of people, I shit you not, that would do this, okay? So like, I want you guys, whoever can hear my voice, to think about, okay, does it really make sense that at the same time that the Democratic platform became the most racially liberal it's ever fucking been, that suddenly the Democrats have abandoned communities of color? Because it doesn't make sense to me, right? That seems weird, actually, because right now, this is the most racially progressive Democratic Party that has existed since the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were signed into law by Lyndon Johnson, and he divorced the Southern Democratic segregationist wing of the party. Okay. Other than that fucking moment, you could not find a time in which the Democratic platform has been more aggressively promoting the rights of Black and communities of color, or more inclusive. So I don't know where the hell this idea that Black people and Latino people are not being represented. Now, they have always been neglected in the campaign atmosphere, where they have never been invested in properly. And I promise you this, if we survive this bullshit Democratic nightmare that we're living through right now, that is going to change. It should have changed in 2016. Okay. And the fact that it fucking didn't is absolute malpractice of the Democratic coalition. Okay. But so I can promise you that is going to change. And the importance of voters of color in that coalition is finally going to be recognized all the way across the board. But in terms of political representation, go and look at the Democratic caucus in the House. Okay. The Senate is another deal. It is extremely difficult to diversify the Senate, but in places where Democrats control the states like New Jersey and California, they are sending diverse members to the Senate. Okay. And, I think that the Republican Party is straight up trying to get Democrats to beat themselves, because they can't beat them from the outside. They're trying to get them to fracture again from the inside. And I would really caution you guys, before you accept this narrative that Democrats have abandoned communities of color at the very same time that their platform has begun to really, for the first time, aggressively represent them. Okay.
Okay, Rachel, we have Tom in the house. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it. Tom.
Rachel.
Hey, buddy.
How's it going?
My rant right there.
It was a good one. You were on a roll.
If you hear that shit pop up anywhere, I think they just unleashed that into the food chain. Like, how Democrats abandoned the working class, like they unleashed that 10 years ago. Yep. Don't let that shit fly by you without somebody calling it out.
I hear you.
All right, Tom, somebody in here right before that wanted to know, what does the data say about because we've got all these signals that they got hampered because the pandemic killed voter registration, because Democrats stopped registering voters. So you can't look at that the way Wasserman did today, because it's a noisy signal now. And vote by mail got killed because Trump turned off Republicans from using vote by mail. But you still have signals in your data that can tell us, like, what's going on. Are things looking good for us? Are they looking bad? Tell us, what do you see?
Yeah, look, so we go back to March when this pandemic hit us, and it was a huge question mark, right? I think we were headed for a situation where I think we all agreed turnout was going to be approaching record levels. And then the pandemic happens, and then no one knows where we are. And as you said, registration falls off the table, big questions, very low turnout, some primaries. And then suddenly we see states reacting, like Georgia, and expanding the electorate and expanding the vote, saying you can vote by mail, you can vote early, and don't get me wrong, Georgia did a lot of things wrong in their primary, but they did a lot of things right too. And what happened there, Democrats set a record for votes cast in a primary in Georgia in that election. And so suddenly, we were still tracking registration. Then we started tracking vote by mail requests, and everything we're seeing, Democrats are checking every box along the way of intensity. And then the vote starts. The voting starts a couple weeks ago. Here we are now. 23 million-ish people have voted, which means we're like, more than halfway in terms of the early votes that were cast last time. We've basically exceeded the number of half. And we still have 18 days to go. And so, as you say, there's a lot of noise in there, right? Because everyone will say, well, the lesson learned from 2016, myself included, we looked at the early vote and we said, well, look, it looks good for Democrats. And we got a little bit too excited about it. And what we weren't paying enough attention to was who was voting. And now everyone hears, cannibalization is the hot term, right? It's, are Democrats cannibalizing their election day vote? Because everyone says the pandemic, look, I got my ballot sitting right here. I voted in every election and I'm voting by mail for the first time, right? My vote is being cannibalized. But the fact of the matter is, to your question, what we're seeing is that a lot of first-time voters, non-2016 voters we call sporadic voters, they're coming out. They're coming out to vote. So yes, a ton of people are coming out to vote who are people who would have voted election. We're not paying it. We don't get excited about a lead among those voters. Those are people who are voting anyhow.
Right.
What we get excited about is the surges. It's the things that we didn't expect to happen. Seeing people who are voting for the first time. I say first time. I don't mean first presidential election. I don't mean first general election. I mean, these people could have voted in their state primaries a few weeks ago and they didn't vote. They're voting for the first time in their lives. And you look at that huge surge. 2 million of those people have, about 900,000 of those people have voted already. Democrats have a lead with those voters. We look at the sporadic voters, the people who, they might have voted in 2012. They stayed home in 2016. Believe it or not, there are a lot of those voters. We saw that especially among younger African-American men having diminished turnout. And what we're seeing is a huge surge of those voters coming out. Democrats have an even bigger lead with those voters. Women coming out at much higher numbers than before. Women are outnumbering men, and I'm looking at the latest numbers now, by an 11-point share. If you look at the share of the electorate, women are up by 11 points. At this time in the early vote in 2016, 4 years ago, that was a 7-point share. Massive. So it's really, what we're seeing is remarkable. We're headed towards a turnout that could be, before election day, upwards of 90 or even 100 million votes cast before the polls open on election day, which is just unprecedented. It's honestly hard to wrap my head around.
Good. This is good news. I mean, and you know what? In terms of like the Bidikofer model and theory and whatever, like that's what I need to hear. I mean, I need, for me to have that stuff come to fruition, that's what I needed to hear. So that's good.
Well, I mean, look, in the end, there's always going to be a question mark, right? Until we get through election day. Yeah. But what we will know, because I see this every time that, we put updates out, people will say, well, Republicans are voting on election day. Republicans are voting. I've heard that 10,000 times. Yes, Republicans will vote on election day. They will almost certainly have a larger share of their turnout on election day than they've had in the past, because of the way the president has demagogued the issue and made it something where his voters, many of whom are at risk, will have to put themselves at risk in order to vote. But the question is, as this gap grows larger and larger in key states like Pennsylvania, where the gap is approaching 45 points in terms of Democrats versus Republican voting, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes cast, will the hole be too deep on election day for Republicans to crawl out of it? And again, we won't know until that happens. It's a known unknown at this point, if I can be Rumsfeldian. But if I can go to a tired sports metaphor, the question is, will Republicans have to score from the 20-yard line or the 95 yards out from their own 5, right?
Right.
And they're getting further away every day as they failed to turn their voters out early. I mean, as you know, because you've talked about this a lot, especially in Florida, where you've paid a lot of attention to this, Republicans win campaigns there by banking votes early and taking their resources and focusing it down to this diminished universe. So they have more money to spend on fewer voters.
Yeah.
They don't have that advantage this year. And they have less money. It happens to happen in the year where they're getting outraised for the first time in a long time.
Yeah,
so
and not just by a little, by a lot. Right. Yeah, because what people need to understand is they're not up against Trump Biden. He's up against the RNC. The RNC runs the vote, right? That's why Trump won in 2016 with a shitty campaign. And that's why he's formidable now, even though his campaign's basically broke and a hot mess, right? The RNC runs the turnout operation. But as you just pointed out, it is true that Trump could not have fucked them more than by going after early voting, because like, you know, it's true you can shift them to that one day, but then it's one and done, right? It's all the eggs are in the one day, and they don't get all those points to push. And Democrats are pushing, push, right? So,
yeah, well, we're pushing and we're striking, right? So if we take these targets and we look at Florida and we look at the massive turnout and the massive Democratic advantage and a lot of sporadic voters who we've turned out and banked, as soon as what the Biden campaign does is they have this list of targets. And when that target votes, we get it in real time. It happens that end of that day, we know that person voted. They're removed from all the digital ads. They're removed from the call list. They're removed from everything other than the activist list to try to get people to go out and, you know, do their own texting and calling. But suddenly they don't have to spend the money that they would have spent on getting that voter to vote. Republicans, as you say, they have to keep hitting them every day and spending money on them every day. The Biden campaign takes them off the list and says, all right, next vote.
Trump has really spicked them on this vote by mail.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, you could see it. Like I said, it's two things, basically three things in public opinion have been that extraordinary. The 7-year transition of a public opinion on gay marriage and pot legalization, which went like rocket change. And now the public opinion, like total switch of Republican opinion on vote by mail, because their leader said this is evil, and boom. I mean, we don't have a lot of data because we weren't asking Republicans about it. But if we did, it would be two humps, like one over here, one over there on vote by mail. And it's just extraordinary how much he pushed them away. And it's really hurting them now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, you see, he's saying one thing, as has been the case throughout his presidency. He's tweeting one thing, and then his people are coming behind and trying to clean it up. So his campaign, they're emailing people, they're texting people, they're serving digital ads. Yeah. I've gotten emails because I've signed up for some of the lists saying, please vote early, vote by mail.
Yes.
You know, this troubles them. But in the end, he continues to hammer the issue. And to the extent he's tried to get people to vote early, it's been the muddled message, like when he told people in North Carolina to vote twice.
Yes,
it's a problem, and we're seeing the early vote data. Again, they're heeding his Twitter message more than they're heeding the campaign message, because you can't compete with him as a messaging machine.
Nope.
They're staying home, and yeah, they'll come out on election day. The question is, are there enough of them at this point? Because the Democratic margins with sporadic voters and new voters are just unprecedented, and he's going to have to find something else. He's lost the swing vote. We see, as I said, women coming out, suburban voters. There's a reason why he talks about suburban women all the time in his tweets, right? You see the thinking behind that. That's Bill Stepien telling him, we need to talk about these voters because we've lost them.
If only Bill Stepien could convince him that they weren't all 1950s housewives, right? He might have better odds.
That's the problem they have.
Cool. Well, do you want to hang out for the last 12 minutes here? Great. And see if any Q&A hits you too?
For sure. Sounds
all
good.
All right. Flip,
Rachel, we've got a few more questions ready, but I also wanted to let you know that your partner in crime, Sam Epstein, has joined. So you might want to
well, let's
say hello and bring him in.
Too. Sam.
Hey, Rachel, I'm here. I am sporting a mask because I'm still in public. But I'm here to answer any questions.
He's leading by example, guys. Look at him. He looks great, doesn't he? Sam's a student at NYU, and he is curing whatever in the chemistry lab there right now, right?
Yeah, thank you. We're researching tuberculosis. I'm working on my PhD in chemistry, but happy to join in.
That is so important, I mean, I feel bad about taking you away from even a minute of curing tuberculosis to talk about this. I mean, I guess we're kind of curing tuberculosis in terms of Trump, right?
Right.
Great. Well, you guys on here, just to remind you the fancy modeling work that you now see on my work, that's Sam. I mean, that's not me. I'm not, that's not my thing. It's, you know, my thing is the brain with the thoughts and the theory. Sam is the modeler. So, you know, I wanted you guys to get a chance to meet him, even though he technically is working right now. So he's sneaking in a break. And, you know, at some point we're going to have a model specific, you know, question and answer town hall with him. Kind of threw this thing together on the fly. So I wasn't really thinking about, like, you know, doing a modeling one, but yeah, we'll have Sam on one of those too. But yeah, Sam, hang out and see if there, you know, see if there's any any part of the questions and answers you want to get in on too. Okay.
For sure.
All right.
All right. How about we go to Robin Donaldson? Oh, let me unmute you. Give me just one sec. All right. You should be able to unmute now, Robin, if you're there.
Hi, I was just wondering, when it comes to Latino men moving towards Trump, is that something that is happening nationwide, or is that specific to like Texas, Florida, or California?
That's a great question. I mean, here's the one thing I have to say is I don't know that it's true. Okay. And I'm going to have Stephanie Valencia come back on. If you guys watch that episode of The Election Whisperer, she's an expert on Latino public opinion. She has a big, giant database of Latino public opinion. So she would be the best person to answer that question. I'm really dubious about anything that's a low end size that says, oh, look, we see movement of, you know, opinion, because we're talking about with those, like when it's, you know, when it says like, oh, Latino men are moving against Trump, we could often be talking about 10 respondents, okay? Like literally 10 respondents. And so, you know, it's really hard for me to say that that's a true thing. Now, here's what I think may be going on. A twofold problem. Number one, the malpractice of the Democratic National Committee, which should have on November 10th of 2016 launched a Manhattan-sized project of Latino infrastructure and investment in Florida and Texas, in Arizona and the Southwest, broadly speaking, that should have been designed to make sure that there's just absolutely no question and no doubt that Donald Trump would be leaving the White House in January of 2020. And so therefore, you know, persuasion and mobilization of Latinos would have been a major component of that. And we just have no doubt that Latino men were definitely not moving towards Trump, right? And so the fact that we have to wonder is a testament to that incompetence of that C-suite up there that didn't do that. But in terms of if there is movement, and it's not just from the fact that these Latino men are hearing from Trump and not from the Democrats, then I would think it would be an education issue. Okay, I think, you know, writ large, we have this educational divide in the U.S. and college education and non-college educated people are starting to kind of show these behavioral differences. So I definitely something post-election I want to look at, team up with Stephanie Valencia and kind of start to examine. Okay.
Okay, Rachel, we've only got a few minutes left here, but next in the queue is Lisa Reyna Lowe. And I believe you're still muted, but give me 1 second. All right, you should be free to unmute.
Hi, Rachel.
Hey, you're looking good.
You're doing this. Hi, everyone from Texas. Okay, so one thing, somebody just took poll manager training, and so they brought this up to me, that at the end of that training, they were told that if you go into the polls and one of the election officials there writes on your ballot, whether it is a check mark or a star or an R or a D or any kind of writing of any kind, that it could disqualify your ballot. Have you heard that at all? Now, I know because so many of us have already voted, you don't have to do your signature or anything else. And I mean, I protected my ballot like it was one of my newborns or something. No one touched my ballot. That stayed with me. I put it in the machine, period. Have you heard that it disqualifies? And then the only other thing I wanted to mention, I'm a Mexican-American woman here in Texas. We've been out in so many districts, lit dropping and everything, and we have purposely hit Democratic rich areas that were ignored in 2018. mainly majority minority communities. And they are so thankful to get the information because they have been ignored.
Yes.
And while it is true that we had a huge wave of diversity going to the House in 2018, they are just so hungry for any of us to show up and finally say, we see you, we hear you, here is the information, here's where you go register, here's where you go vote, here is who's running in your district, all the way down to dog catcher, all the way up to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But people of color have just been so ignored everywhere here in Texas that we're going to, and they're like, where have you been? You know, we haven't even voted before because no one has bothered to come even talk to us to ask us what we are feeling. In fact, my friend Catherine went to a trailer park community where there were 300 homes there,
Right.
and only 2 were registered to vote, 2 homes. And when they were done, all 300 homes, they registered all 300 homes.
Yep.
All of them wanted the information.
Oh, no.
They're just ignored.
I know it, and that's the thing. Like, so I want to really make sure everyone understands that is a legitimate Democratic ignoring problem that I have for like 3 years been telling you guys can't happen anymore, and is what I was just talking about with the DNC is malpractice. Like, it can't happen. Like, why would you do that? Like, you know, these people will vote for you. And yes, I get the persuasion is a 2-for-1 thing. I'm not saying you don't do that, but you also do this, okay? You also do this. And you go in there and you tell them, look, this is what the Democratic platform is. This is what it's trying to do. And this is why it's not happening. It's not happening because over here, you know, you've got this guy, Mitch McConnell, and he won't fucking let anything through, right? And the only way to ever get this to change is through a mass mobilization that is sustained and doesn't ebb and flow every 2 fucking years, right? So we have, like, it has to be a constant infrastructure, right? So yeah, I'm with you, Lisa, and I'm glad to hear your story. I hope other people benefited from it, and I know that Tom is, of course, heavily committed to that infrastructure growth too. And Sam,
I can say that as a Mexican American, if you get to the grandmother of the family,
right?
Make sure the entire family follows in her example.
No doubt.
Get to the grandparents, the entire family follows suit. So,
and now it's a matter of life and death, dude. Even when it's not imminent life and death like it is right now, it is life and death. Like, we're talking about life and death for people. So we want to make sure we're putting our best foot forward with every dime that's donated and every hour that comes out. We want to make sure that people are getting their best bang for their buck. And that America, like, I mean, we want Germans, like the German reporter I'm talking to be like, oh yeah, America, man, still the best of the best. I don't want to be a fake, like, I want to be the SEC. In college football, the SEC is the best conference, and the best of the best is Alabama. I want to be Alabama. I don't want to pretend to be Alabama. Okay. Like, I want to be the best. Like, let's go be the best. That's all I'm saying. All right, Sam, I'm glad you got a chance to duck in. You look fabulous with your mask. And,
thank you.
We're going to arrange a second town hall real soon to talk some more about the election stuff. And if you didn't get your question in, I hope you'll come back and try again and get your question in then. And Tom, I don't know if you're still here, but thanks, buddy, for coming and setting people's minds at ease, because I know people have been getting election anxiety, and that's why I'm going to try to do a few of these live shows coming down the stretch, okay?
Rachel, before we let all these fine people go, I have one most important question for you.
Oh, yeah? I can't marry you, Flip.
What is The Cycle? Tell us all about it.
Oh, yeah, The Cycle is my new website. And right now it is hosting my forecasting stuff with Sam. And eventually it's going to grow and lead to world domination. So you guys should definitely go check it out. And, make sure that you're checking it out. And The Election Whisperers new house is going to be in there, and I've got some serious plans for the cycle that I can't disclose right now. But let's just say some people are going to, really love it, and some people are not.
Thecycle.news, right?
That's right. Yeah. Right now, the URL for it is thecycle.news. Yep.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. Nicely done, Rachel.
Yeah. Thanks. Everybody give 5 cheers to my handsome co-host. Thank you.
Dude, thanks for having me, Rachel.
Man, I hope you don't get in trouble.
Oh no, I'm good. Don't worry.
All right, good deal. We're gonna do another one real soon, and we'll do it around your schedule, Sam.
Thank you.
All
All right,
right.
see you soon.
Bye.